Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. It is an installment of the Retrospective. We shall be covering episode 55, Sweet and Sour Puss, or as it's known in the Japanese original, Dedede's Certain Love. This episode was released in Japan on November 2nd, 2002 as the 55th episode, while the English dub on November 15th, 2003 was also released as the 55th episode. Wow, 2 episodes in a row that were not rearranged in release order. Let's see how long this lasts. Sweet and sour in the title is a reference to sweet and sour sauces, which are a broad category of sauces commonly used in East Asian and Southeast Asian cuisine. But enough of this sort of pre-review trivia. Let's start with the episode's plot itself. The episodes open in the throne room, where we see the king ordering a monster by the enemy monster delivery system. Things seem fine at first, but quickly go sour as the summoned monster swiftly goes over to the king and, against his consent, inserts itself into the king's body as he moans in extreme pain and tells him to stop. And the opening ends with a shot of Dedede's bloodstream. This is arguably the shortest intro sequence to ever be in the anime, only being 17 seconds in length, and frankly, given how abrupt and shocking it was left quite an impression. Regardless, we then see the jazzy intro. After the jazzy intro, we cut to the next morning as we see Escargoon happily dancing down the hall, holding a thorny rose in his hand, as we see the first change between versions. In the Japanese original, he hums a song that is in line with the Japanese intro theme. It's a fine, sparkling sort of sound, but out of fear for its frankly non-existent homosexual undertones, 4Kids saw it fit to radically change the lyrics, and frankly, this was quite a silly decision. I mean, yeah, I get it, this was the very early 2000s, and gay people were not quite as socially accepted, but I don't really see the subtext, and I'm sorry to say it, it just seems like Ted Lewis is just a frankly horrible singer. Like, listen, I get it, he's putting on a voice, but still, let's be honest, nobody would be aroused by listening to Escargoon sing. The censorship is just laughably atrocious, and understandably, there leaves a greater impact than the song itself, Streisand effect and all that. Escargoon enters into the king's bedroom and places a vase of roses onto his bedside table. However, the shadow of fear covers him, and he turns to see the king is looking at him. The snail is understandably and utterly terrified, as the king says that he thinks he's a grouch, a grump, and a rotten boss, because he overheard him singing. The sniveling snail says he wasn't talking about the king, but indeed he says it's all right. Escargoon understandably doesn't believe him and thus backs up and trips on the king's nightstand. This causes the vase of roses to fall upon the king's head, which mortifies the snail servant, who backs up expecting to get hammered, and for a moment Dedede does give off a negative glare, and the snail believes that he's about to get hit, but to his shock and horror, the king puts the vase back down on the table as Escargoon asks bemused that he's not angry, and shockingly, the king forgives him with deranged eyes. Escargoon for a moment contemplates if he is dreaming and thus decides to hit himself against the wall, but the king just calmly walks away. He then sees the king re-enter the room with a mop, which the snail takes initially chagrin towards and thinks he's going to hit him, but the king just begins mopping the floor. But Escargoon says he won't be tricked and knows that the king is secretly mad at him. However, the king assures him that he is not angry. Escargoon is still skeptical, but the king says that they should let bygones be bygones, and Escargoon seems finally convinced, but does take the mop away from him because he doesn't fully trust him, which causes the king to stumble back, step upon the thorns of the rose, which causes him pain as he falls over, leading to the vase falling upon his head again, leaving him in a nasty bump. Escargoon prepares for the worst, but the king asks why he pushed him over, and the snail says he's sorry, but the king surprises him by saying it's okay and he's forgiven. The sheer out-of-characterness causes Escargoon to beg him to get angry. But the king says he just wants to be friends. Escargoon yells in confusion as we see some neat camera work as we transition to Dr. Yabui's hospital. We see the doctor examine the king and comes to the decision that it's all in the king's head. In the Japanese original, he even goes as far as to not give a proper diagnosis and just puts a bandage on his head. In the Japanese original, Escargoon also says he should do more tests and refers to like urine, though it and all other profanity were removed by 4Kids in order to be more child-friendly. Escargoon demands that he does something, but Dr. Yabui says he's perfectly healthy. The king says he doesn't feel sick, and the pair drive off. Escargoon says the guy was a cook, but the king acknowledges that he was a nice doctor, and Escargoon sees Tiff, Tuff, Kirby, and the others, and so decides to drive over to them, interrupting their conversation. Escargoon explains the issue to them. Tiff asks what the issue is with him not getting upset and being terrible all the time, but Escargoon says that he's unusually calm in a very creepy manner. Tuff asks if he really won't get angry, and Escargoon assures him that such is the case. To test this, Tuff goes over and kicks the car, which shocks everyone except the king, who's okay with it. He then keeps it up to the point that eventually Escargoon tries to get him to stop before anything can get too damaged. But the king says it's alright, and we then see the various Cappies reacting in shock. The police chief Bookums asks what's wrong with the king, while the mayor says that he's lost his marvels. Kawasaki says something redundant, to which Gus agrees before we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Gus says that he must be sick, but there's an additional short scene where Dr. Yabui rebuffs the claim of Gus, saying that he gave him a clean bill of health. And then we see Professor Curio suggest that it could have been an unknown virus he missed. 4Kids remove this for unknown reasons that are perhaps due to the need to better fit within the airing schedules of the US. We then see Gengu, the toy store owner, Spikehead, Tuff, and the others painting on the limousine. Escargoon tries to get them to stop, but the king remains calm, even as he is painted by the children, including Kirby. Man, he's really calm. As for the change with the additional scene of Professor Curio and Dr. Yabui, frankly, I don't really consider it a major loss that it was removed, but it was neat to see him a bit more. He says it's okay, even as Escargoon tells him to let it out. Tiff and the others are astounded by his calmness. The mayor says he could be faking it, but Professor Curio says that it's unlikely. The toy store owner Gengu, however, says that they should test it and gives everyone toy hammers, which we then see everyone hit him with, including Gengu, Kawasaki, the mayor, Bookums, Tuggle, Tuff, Spikehead, Honey. Iroh hits him with a freaking golf club. We then see Professor Curio, Yabui, Mabel, Samo, Biblio, Melman the Mailman, Fololo, and Falala all get their hits in, with Kirby being the last one to do so. The king astounds them by forgiving them, as we see the next change between versions. As in the Japanese original, when everyone steps back in shock, Chief Bookums pulls out his firearm. Four kids, seeking to remove violent references, airbrush it out. Another case of unnecessary censorship to protect the children. Escargoon asks if he's mad, but then Gus says that he can make the king angry. He then proceeds to mess with the limousine's inner workings, and he tells the king to go give it a drive. Escargoon tries to stop him, but the two drive uncontrollably away. Tough asks Gus what he did, and he explains that he broke the brakes. The two are sent driving and crashing into a swampy area. Escargoon bemoans and asks why the king won't get angry, and the king asks why can't they all just get along and be friends. Tiff says he seems to have really changed, and Professor Kira wonders if this is just a ruse, but the mayor says maybe they should not doubt the change and just give him a chance. Everyone cheers, though Escargoon remains a bit skeptical. We then see channel Dedede, where Escargoon announces the king's change in personality. Must be a slow news day. We see Sir Ibram and Lady Like are astounded by the change in the tyrant's personality, with Escargoon explaining that the king doesn't ever get angry, which further astounds Tiff's parents. Further, Escargoon announces the king, who he shows off. Sir Ibram says that he looks loopy, while Escargoon enters into the area with a large hammer. He slams it down upon the king's head, which the king is completely forgiving of. Escargoon asks for his reasoning behind such a sickening display, and the king explains that his change was due to the power of love. As the reaction to this, we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Escargoon, Ladylike, Sir Ibram, various cabbies, Tiff, Tough, Full of Allah, and even Kirby say shocked, "Love." In the English dub, this is changed to everyone yelling in shock, except for Tiff, Tough, and the wretched bird Takori, Folo and Fala, who just say, "Wow, no way." Kirby's line is left unedited, which would normally bother me as I don't like Kirby speaking, but the line is so quiet and subtle, it just sounds like generic baby noises, so it's really not that bad. The change between versions was really inconsequential, and so I don't really have an opinion on it, but bland neutrality. Resuming with the plot, he does a monologue that we must be forgiving to people. This sees another change between versions in the regards to the examples that he uses. In the Japanese original, he mentions ending the cycle of hatred by using love and generosity, even encouraging the viewers to allow themselves to be trampled on, beaten, or even killed. He really is the ultimate pacifist. Four Kids changed this to him only mentioning being treated badly, being painted on, or having their limousine kicked and being played pranks on. This change was likely due to Four Kids wanting to remove all violent references that could negatively influence children, but on one hand, I oppose all forms of censorship, especially when it's based on bogus moralistic concerns like violence in media or sexism, whatever. However, I must admit the English dub does go in line better with the broader story, making allusions to past events that actually occurred in the episode. On the other hand, I must admit the Japanese original had a better message overall, so in conclusion, I'm just undecided on which version is better, though I do lean slightly on the Japanese original. There is also another change between versions with regards to the background music of the scene. In the Japanese original, there is a rearrangement of the theme A New Wind for Tomorrow, which was the end credits song for the first Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land, which I've recently reviewed, by the way, so go check that video out if you're interested. The English dub removed this music. Now, originally I would have said that it is for unknown reasons, but thanks to a friend who I'm gonna keep them anonymous just so that the people who don't like me don't harass them, but he pointed out that recently it's been discovered that Four Kids, despite buying the rights to the show, did not buy the rights to the music of the series. Now, you might think that buying distribution rights to the show would include the music, but Four Kids is notoriously incompetent, so yeah. That kind of makes all the past videos, my retrospective, are a little dated, but to defend myself a bit, I would say this. Because at the end of the day, the reasons of exactly why the music was removed doesn't really impact my opinion on those changes in and of itself, as I think some genuinely good music was removed. Not saying that all the English dub music was bad, there were some genuinely good improvements, like the intro theme or when Kirby's sucking something up. Anyway, thanks for the information, my friend, and I hope to further implement it in future Kirby Right Back at You retrospective installments. Regardless, resuming with the plot, people are amazed by his astounding character change. After this monologue in the Japanese original, Escargoon hits him with a hammer and announces that they will be holding a celebration that night. While the English dub, he just signs off and then hits the king again and is yet again forgiven. The change between versions is minor, but I do think the Japanese original is a bit better due to better transitioning with the plot. In either versions, he says something must be wrong with his head. We then see inside the king's noggin where a demonic urchin is seeming to fill with an unknown blood-like substance, while a gauge seems to go up akin to a bomb. Ominous. We then cut to that night as we see fireworks of smiley faces are shown as there is a large party. Sir Ibram welcomes the people and says that he speaks for everyone when he says that while they are mystified as to how the king changed, but are happy to see the change in his heart to his subjects as everyone claps at the king. The mayor says that even the worst grouch can soften up, with the Japanese original seeing Bookham say that there's even hope for himself, seeming to recognize some of his own inner failings. The English dub just saw Bookham's agree with the mayor, and frankly, it's a bit more bland dialogue overall. Escargoon then announces that people can participate in a game called Pound the Pushover, where they can let out their powerful catharsis of hitting the former tyrant. Toggle is the first to take a small hammer and hits him rather softly. It is here that we see the next change between versions, as in the Japanese original he says, "It's okay, I forgive you, Zoe," while in the English dub, Four Kids changes them to outright thanking people for attacking him. I think the English dub does a better job showing just how utterly passive King Dedede has become. Sammo then takes a swing at the king. In the Japanese original, he refers to his profession as a bar owner, manager. But Four Kids, to remove any references to illicit substances, changed it to him simply expressing his disagreement. I must admit the censorship really made his treatment of the king seem far less justified and petty. The king forgives them as people clap at the spectacle. We then see Gus approach the king. Escargoon tells him to go easy as he's not sure how much more the king can take, but the king tells him to take a shot and Gus hits him hard, giving him a disturbingly bright lump on the head. But still the king forgives him and people cheer at the event. We then see Kawasaki present a horrible dish for the king to eat, as we see the next change between versions here. In the Japanese original, he refers to the wretched dish as Kawasaki's special sauté, while in the English dub, he just calls it a new recipe. Both versions are perfectly fine, but the English dub is a bit more utilitarian in nature. It is disgusting and causes Escargoon to comment upon it. Here we see yet another change between versions. In the Japanese original, he says that he doesn't remember asking for him to bring this dish, to which Kawasaki explains that if the Majesty can eat this, then they'll know that the king is serious. In the English dub, Four Kids changed this to Kawasaki being asked what this garbage is, and he explains that it is his toasted, roasted, boiled, and roasted leg of lamb with liver and kidney bean sauce. 25 years. Ugh. Both versions are fine, but the English dub does a better job conveying the sheer disgust. Regardless, the king eats the meal, and despite a brief pause, swallows it, much to everyone's cheers. Bookham says that if he can stomach Kawasaki's cooking, then he truly has changed, and so people cheer as the mayor says that they'll now live in peace from now on. We then see Tiff and Tuff commenting on the situation, and here we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, Tiff says that while it's a little weird that the king has a change of heart, but that it is a positive to have happened, while Tuff says that things won't be as interesting from now on. In the English dub, this is changed to Tiff suggesting that perhaps Kirby's cheerful attitude rubbed off on the king, and Tuff then says that perhaps they'll have to start liking the king now. Both versions are fine, though I like the Japanese one a bit better. We then see a short scene of fireworks that 4Kids saw fit to remove, likely to better fit within the US air time slots. Kawasaki then brings up his next dish, which is a fried rice with chocolate gravy. 25 years. Somehow even grosser than the last one. The king takes a spoonful and is utterly disgusted by it, but yet still happily consumes the food, which we get an inside look as the parasite urchin ticks closer to its maximum. Kirby then walks up to the king and hits him on the head with a hammer, which the king then proceeds to forgive. Kirby then hits him rapidly some more, which causes the monster inside to only ominously increase its level further. Escargoon comments that with the king being so happy with Kirby means that they won't be buying any monsters from now on. Then he has a realization, yells and runs to the throne room and calls up the enemy sales guy. As usual, the background of the enemy sales guy is altered to avoid religious implications of the Holy Nightmare Incorporated. Escargoon asks him if the king bought a monster recently, and the sales guy admitted that yes, the king did order something, and says that he left a manual. Escargoon picks it up and sees the next change between versions, as in the Japanese original, the book has a heart on the cover and the word manual. 4Kids, for some reason, saw it fit to airbrush these details away, and once again, it's just a very stupid instance of unneeded censorship for the sake of censorship. And it would impact a future part of the episode. The enemy sales guy then explains that after Escargoon asks for clarification, that the monster enters into someone and they lose the ability to get angry or fight back. Escargoon, happy to get a chance at revenge for the king's mistreatment of him over the years, and so decides to run off before he bumps into Tiff, Tuff, and Kirby. Tuff asks why he's in such a rush, and Escargoon explains that his plan for revenge is now at grasp, and says that he has a chance to turn the tables and runs off. Tuff asks if anyone is acting normally around here, and Tiff notices the manual that Escargoon dropped in his haste. It is here that we see the next change between versions. In the Japanese original, she reads the title The Monster of Love Manual, while in the English dub, there seems to be her just suspecting it's a manual despite the lack of a title. Both are fine and really don't change that much. She is in shock upon reading it, and we then cut back to the king. In the Japanese original, there's a short additional scene where the king is eating Kawasaki's cooking. As he finishes it up, Kawasaki brings another disgusting dish, described as being a banana sour cream pie. 25 years. The scene was sadly cut by 4Kids, likely to better fit within US time slots, and admittedly, nothing of real merit was lost, but still, it's a darn shame to see it happen. Regardless, the king seems to grimace as the monster inside him nears its limit. The mayor comments on his passivity, and the police chief Bookham says that if he can handle all this, then nothing will set him off. While Ladylike says that she hopes this change of heart is permanent, while Cerebrum says that they'll see. We then see Escargoon run up to the king on the podium and hit him so hard with a giant hammer that the table collapses. The king seems to gag on his food as Kawasaki and the others balk at the snail's actions. Escargoon then explains that he's gonna get his revenge for his mistreatment at the hands of the king and proceeds to hammer the heck out of him. And he grows massive glowing bumps on the head as the king's eyes glow red as Escargoon laughs maniacally. However, Tiff comes running and tells him to stop, which catches the snail off guard, which causes him to fall upon the king with the heavy hammer by accident. Tiff asks him if he had read the manual all the way, and he admits that he didn't and just sort of skimmed it. And Tiff explains that the monster stored up the energy of its host anger before using it to burst forth as a mega attack, much to Escargoon's newfound fear. Meta Knight then appears out of nowhere and says that the monster is about to blow, and everyone steps back in shock. The king repeatedly says it's okay before erupting in rage, with the Japanese original having him say he's pissed off. Glowing red, he yells out that it's payback time. Tuff says that the nice guy is gone, while Tiff says that he's back to his old self, but Meta Knight says that he's still possessed by the monster. He demands Escargoon to tell him who has been beating on him, and Escargoon decides to shift the blame onto Kirby, which he declares was responsible. And then the king says he shall slam the pink puffball into a flapjack and chases him off the podium, trying to smash him. However, eventually, due to his incompetence, he slips on a random banana peel and lands on his face, which generates even more anger, causing the monster to erupt from the body. And since it's truly shown itself, let's discuss it for a bit now. Togiera is a round, robotic, sea urchin-like monster with a design that is strangely similar to the monster form of Knuckle Joe seen in episode 19, Here Comes the Sun, which I reviewed, and is a strange similarity. It also kind of resembles Gordos, which are a recurring monster in the Kirby series. Another interesting bit of trivia is that its name comes from a combination of the Japanese word for thorn, toge, and the Japanese onomatopoeia for irritating, irera. These refer to the spikes it possesses and for its ability to sap the energy of its host to power its attacks. Overall, while a simple design, it works well in Kirby and I think could be used in the games with quite a bit of ease. In terms of voice actor, he doesn't really have its own, though interestingly, in the Japanese original, it says its name, but in the English dub, it just grunts. In both versions, it's done by the same voice actor as the king, which is a neat little detail since it fed off the king's anger, and it makes sense that it would use his voice. The crowd looks in shock as Bookums is astounded that such a thing was in the king, and Tiff says it looks nasty. Meta Knight explains it has been charged upon by the king's anger, and then fires a pair of needles at Kirby, who tries to block it with a small stool, but it explodes with great force, sending Kirby flying into the air and falling far away. Tiff and Tuff comment on how strong it is, and Tiff then tells Kirby to suck it up. Kirby goes to do so. Togiera shoots some needles, which Kirby dodges and then inhales in order to become... Needle Kirby. We've seen this ability before in 3 previous episodes, so check those out if you want a more detailed coverage of this ability, but I think it transitioned well into the anime, and frankly, I think the anime still has the best design the ability ever had, this sort of yellow with pink hat. This is also the last appearance of the ability, and, well, I think this is a high point to go out on, as we shall soon see in my end discussion. And it kind of says something about how far along we are, that we're getting to the point where we're starting to see abilities' final appearances in this anime. Resuming with the plot, Togiera charges at Kirby, who leaps from the destroyed water fountain and leaps onto a nearby building. Recovering from its impact, Togiera shoots some needles at it, which Kirby counters with his own spikes, which causes a massive explosion. It then shoots another barrage, which sends Kirby flying on down. The monster then rapidly begins shooting at Kirby, forcing him to run away. Tuff says that this monster is mad, and Tiff points out how it's powered by anger, then gets an idea to help give Kirby the edge and calls upon Kaboo, who sends the Warp Star. We see Kirby leap upon the Warp Star as she runs from Togiera's attacks, almost getting hit. He flies forwards towards Kogura, who fires more needles, which again Kirby counters with his own. Dedede finally awakens from his unconsciousness and asks Escargoon if that's the monster he ordered. Escargoon says that he did a wonderful decision to try and kiss up, but Dedede says that he has the belief that he's been hitting his skull a lot. Escargoon tries to deny this, but Tiff stops him and shows the king that he has in fact been clobbering him with his own hammer. Escargoon then runs off as the king looks at him evilly. Kirby and Togiera trade arrows before the demon beast throws all his spikes at Kirby, which again do hit Kirby a bit, and then proceed to chase after Kirby like seeker missiles. They do well at first, going through the sky, but eventually Kirby uses this against them as he leads the spikes to impaling the monster itself. After a bit of sparkling moments, it then explodes, and we see the next and last change between versions here. In the Japanese original, there are a few additional scenes of Togiera before exploding, as well as additional scenes of his explosive death. Frankly, I found 4K's removal of these additional scenes a darn shame, as it really only further highlights how much of an explosion it is. Resuming with the plot, people are amazed at the display while Tiff and Tuff congratulate Kirby on his success at defeating the evil monster. We see the king is chasing after Escargoon, seeking his revenge on Escargoon, who begs for help. Tiff says that the king must not have gotten all his anger absorbed, while Tuff says that he'll be mad for days. Escargoon laughs, which confuses the two kids as he explains that he's happy that the king is back to normal, before the king says that he'll show appreciation by giving him a clobbering as the two run off. Everyone laughs as the episode ends on a shot of Kirby. Now that we've discussed the episode's plot, let's talk about its positives, negatives, and my final thoughts. In terms of positives, I thought the episode's plot was well made. I think the concept of a monster feeding off a negative emotion in order to power up, frankly, very fascinating, and seeing the king behave so out of character was a real treat. And also, I think it says something about people's base nature that so few believed his change of attitude, or that they decided to go right off the bat take advantage of his newfound helplessness and just like abuse the heck out of him. Because let's be frank here, he was extremely abused by some of the people in this episode. Like, if they had done things slightly differently, he could very well have been a nicer person for a lot longer. With that being said, it also makes you wonder who the real monster it really is. Like, is it society or the individual? Or on the other hand, it could just show how much of a bad person that King Dedede was. Speaking of the monster, Togiera is an excellent foe, possessing a sleek if simplistic design that also has an interesting attribute in how it gathers energy, like a parasite. Luckily, it doesn't emerge like some other parasites do and kill its host, but still. It also gave Needle Kirby quite the challenge. Speaking of Needle Kirby, this episode marks the ability's last appearance. Yeah, we've reached the point in this series, as I said before, that we'll be covering the ability's last appearances more often. And frankly, I think it ended on a high note. I like how Kirby actually had to use his wits instead of simply using his ability to defeat Togiera just by itself, as he had done with previous monsters. I think that's a really neat evolution that just goes to show how Kirby has become slowly smarter over time. As for negatives, there's a few. I think Meta Knight was sort of tacked on at the last moment. Felt like he could have played a bit more of a role. The biggest issue for me, however, was the censorship. It just seemed really dumb and stupid. I mean, really, it's just the early 2000s fear of guns and gays, and it's just so silly. But even with that, I still consider it a pretty good episode. Not top tier, but it's still good and worth a watch, especially if you're binging the series. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master. Join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. If you like this video, like it, and if you love it, consider subscribing, and have a wonderful day.